This is so cool. Awesome. It blows cool air on my face and it feels so refreshing. I feel alive. As I set up my YouTube set in Jota, I bought some power tools, and they're really handy. I guess this is how one accumulates know-how. Last video, I said that if the manga industry were to emerge globally, it would greatly alleviate the crisis in the Japanese manga industry. To explain this claim in more detail, I think the Japanese manga industry will continue to grow massively in the future. Yes, but after that, an enormous crisis will definitely await. That's how growth works. If people in the Japanese manga industry and the Japanese government are wise, massive growth will surely come. That's what I believe. But a major crisis must come after significant growth. Growth has conditions, and a big crisis is inevitably part of it. Let me explain this with a simple graph. So, here, everyone, take a look at this graph, please. This is a graph of the Japanese manga market from 1991 to 2019. Do you see the V-shape? This graph is something I predicted around 10 years ago that this would happen. The Japanese manga market, which had declined from 2014 to 2015, began to grow again. And in 2018 to 2019, about 5 to 6 years ago from now, it started growing very quickly. I clearly thought and insisted that this would happen. But now, looking back, isn't it obvious? Isn't it natural that Japanese manga would grow? Some people might think this. If you only look at recent graphs or changes in Japanese manga, you might think that way. But surprisingly, even just 7 to 8 years ago, people were saying the Japanese manga market was shrinking. Many were worried and saying if things continued, the Japanese manga industry might disappear. You can't imagine that now, right? But that's how it was back then. And at the time, there were significant concerns, analyses, and predictions about it. Though it wasn't correct, it was relatively natural. Because people tend to just read the latest graphs and data. If the graph is going up, their gaze just follows the upward trend. When the graph is going down, it follows the downward trend. Japan's prices seem to be on a flat line for about 20 years. Then, it might hit an upward trend. But that would be a mistake. There's a tendency to believe things will continue as they are for about 1,000 years. I think my happiness seems to be declining. I tend to think it will continue declining. And I'll keep getting more and more unhappy. So when growth happens, people believe that it will keep growing. The market was declining 10 years ago, so most people thought the Japanese manga market would keep dropping. That time, the people I met said that. Most people said that the decline of the Japanese manga market would continue. Maybe now, some of them will say, "No, I didn't think that way." Or I didn't say the market keeps dropping down. Anyway, we need to closely examine the Japanese manga market. There was a peak in 1996. Some call it the 1995 peak. From the 1995 to 1996 peak until 2015, the graph kept going down. So many people thought the Japanese manga market would keep falling. When we look back, many publishers and authors were struggling. At that time, the sales of magazines and books were continuously dropping. The book sales were continuously dropping. The first print runs were decreasing. That's what people were saying. The publishers wouldn't publish books with a first print run of less than 30,000 copies in a single volume in the 90s. They wouldn't publish works selling less than 50,000 copies in the first print. Now, the first print is 14,000 copies. For new mangaka's works and new titles, they publish with a first print run of 10 to 9,000 copies. That's how it was back then. It's hard to imagine now, right? And many publishers were struggling as their sales decreased. Many publishing houses and their magazines were closed back then. There was a saying that Japanese manga readers would not buy series with more than 10 volumes. Sales were only for long-time hit works from the late 90s to early 2000s that continued to be popular. If a new work exceeded 10 volumes, its sales would drop. Readers wouldn't buy books anymore. There was also talk that rookie mangaka's page rates were decreasing. The basic page rate per page for rookie mangaka in Japan was 7,000 yen. Major publishing houses or weekly magazines paid higher fees for new artists than others. But generally, 7,000 yen is the basic page rate. 7,000 yen is the standard, but it was broken back then. Some publishers were paying new artists 4,000 yen per manga manuscript. That was what happened. Scary, right? And many manga magazines were closing. Many excellent editors were losing their jobs. I have witnessed what happened to them afterward. Their pain was indescribable. People don't care about or remember their pain, but I knew they were excellent editors. They loved manga, their publishing houses, the magazines they worked on, and the manga titles they were part of. But they couldn't do their dream job anymore. Their loss and pain. I could feel it, because I've also had many experiences in life. There was a time like that. People were saying that Japanese manga might disappear. The Japanese manga industry was like a dinosaur. No, not like a dinosaur, but definitely a dinosaur. Japanese manga would definitely vanish. It would disappear in the early 21st century. People were saying things like that. Yes, that's how it was back then. But I told them, no, the shrinking Japanese manga market is a natural phenomenon before the digital transition. If manga starts transitioning to digital, it will grow in a V-shape. That's what I said. So I told them who were struggling to hang in the field. If you could survive and be strong, if you were prepared for the digital manga era, opportunities would come. That's what I said. Actually, over the last 7 to 8 years, I told Japanese and Korean people in the field, before, talking about preparing for the digital transition was obvious. Digital is now so obvious that it doesn't even count as a prediction. Now, it's as obvious and common sense as saying, you should have dinner. So now, when I told them to prepare for global, those who prepare will gain much and achieve greater things. Please prepare. But no one is preparing for global. Maybe in the future, some will come out saying, yeah, we prepared for global. So why did I make that prediction? Why did I predict that digital transition would happen and Japanese manga would grow in a V-shape? Because I saw what was happening in the Korean manhwa industry, not just by reading the articles or hearing from someone, but by actively getting involved, researching, discussing, and witnessing firsthand what was happening in the manga industry. Then I realized that something wonderful happens with digital transition. What wonderful things happen? At first, the market size didn't visibly grow significantly, but the income structure for publishers and authors changes. The change in the income structure is significant. It dramatically changes the world. Authors' income shares increase, and eventually, the market itself grows as a result. I'll talk about this in detail someday. This one is also very interesting. So, what I have seen, experienced, and researched such things, I thought it would happen. Because the digital transition is such an obvious thing. Yes, digital transition will happen everywhere. Yes, even cars undergo digital transition. It's such an obvious thing. Of course, it will happen. Saying digital transition will happen in any field is like saying the industry will grow in a V-shape. And I knew something else. Besides the history and industry of manga and my experience in the field, I believe manga is incredibly good and has unlimited potential. Through my experience with various genres and types of manga in Korea and Japan, I've come to realize that manga is more amazing than many people think. Manga has tremendous potential. One of those potentials is what I mentioned, that manga is the oil, rice, and semiconductors of each country's cultural industry. In fact, the terms oil, rice, and semiconductors are words I thought of today. But I've been thinking about this idea for a long time. Anyway, the Japanese manga market has grown significantly in the past 5 years. It already has surpassed the peak of 1996. It probably exceeded 700 billion yen annually. That's about around $5 billion. It could have been much more in dollars due to the weak yen, but it's still an enormous amount. How huge is it? Let me tell you, to influence the world. How significant is culture? How great is the films? The scale of all these cultural industries is based on the North American theater market. At its peak, the North American theater market was about $12 billion. Some say it was $14 billion, some say $13 billion, but I think it was about $12 billion. So, the Japanese domestic manga market is about 40% of the peak size of this enormous North American theater market. It's an enormous scale. But this graph doesn't continue to grow indefinitely. When the Japanese manga market was growing the most several years ago, it grew by about 100 billion yen each year. Converting that to dollars, it's about $1 billion. About $1 billion. A new market close to $1 billion. It means a new market was being created. It's incredible. It's amazing. However, this growth will not continue forever. While it might seem natural to think the graph would continue to rise or remain stable, but in reality, such a continuously rising or parallel graph doesn't exist. That's the real world. Many people hope that Japan's prices will continue like this for 1,000 years. But such a thing doesn't happen. It will never be like that. Because it's the real world. So it will not continue to grow by $1 billion every year. In fact, last year's growth rate was much smaller than that. Yes, it continues to grow, but it's slightly increasing and then pausing. Currently, what will happen in the future, whether this pause will lead to a rise again, or if it will continue in parallel, I don't know. I don't know that, but what I do know is that although it rose like this and then drew a V shape, if the people in the Japanese manga industry, including myself, are wise, we can catch another rising trend. We can catch it again with great momentum, from a point much higher than now. Of course, it won't continue to rise like this forever, but it will reach a certain level. So, how large can it grow? Several years ago, I said this. It can grow to about double the current size. Yes, if the Japanese manga industry and, more precisely, the Japanese manga industry and the government are wise, the Japanese domestic manga market can double in size. This was my prediction several years ago. Now, it can be thought of as growing between 1.5 to 2 times. This number is. The significance of these numbers is important. I can't specify an exact amount, but the resonance of the image is important. Currently, it's $5 billion. I believe that if our Japanese manga industry and the Japanese government are wise, the Japanese domestic market can grow to $10 billion. Of course, if various favorable factors come into play, it could grow even larger, and it has the potential to grow much more than we imagine. But I believe it will definitely reach $10 billion. This $10 billion is a massive scale. It's similar to the market size of North American theaters at their peak. I think it will be like that. So, how should the Japanese manga industry and the Japanese government wisely manage the manga industry to reach $10 billion? Yes, not vaguely, but specifically, what needs to be done? I will talk about this in the next video. Thanks for watching. Goodbye, everyone. Before close the video, I need to cool down for a bit. I'm getting addicted.